Hello, everybody. It's a daybreak. There's some twilight action going. You know, Odysseus, which is one of the central epics, along with Iliad of ancient Greek society, a daybreak, the appearance of the sun, is expressed in a very beautiful manner. The metaphor goes, every time there's a daybreak, it is said that a rose-fingered dawn appeared. So basically, because epics make up a DNA of culture, of any culture, and then you have arts and sciences and laws and cultural behavior, and all of those comprise a cultural phenotype. Now, epics generally are very important if you are trying to have holistic understanding of cultures. My left hand is really trembling. Probably the reason has to do with my cousin who literally ripped it off when we were arm wrestling. So anyway, if you want to understand cultures holistically and you are trying to have a somewhat right hemisphere understanding of a civilization, namely that a particular culture, as Oswald Spengler conceives it, is not a bunch of disconnected events that are just put together in a history textbook. Oswald Spengler, coming from Goethean understanding of nature, and Goethe, who is an author of the most foundational Western epic, that is the Faust. So if the epics of the Greek society are Iliad and the Odyssey, which comprise their Old Testament and the New Testament, the epic of the Western society is the Faust, the European society. You could say that the epic of an American society is not Keeping Up with Kardashians, as people like to joke, but rather that it is Moby Dick. If you go too specific, you could say that the epic of specifically German society is Song to the Nibelungs, and so on and so forth. But the thing about Goethe is that apart from writing Faust, he was versed into a number of disciplines, and one of them was botany and his exploration of animals. And he basically, apart from finding an intermaxillary bone, which was thought to be missing in human skull, and the thing about the intermaxillary bone is that it was present in other mammals, but for some reason it was absent in humans. But Goethe found it, and the significance of the intermaxillary bone and why it is connected with Goethe is that according to Goethe, every family or every organism is an expression of a particular principle. And if humans belong to that taxa, then by the rule of the principle, the Urpflanze or Ursymbol, which Germans like to use, basically humans had to have that intermaxillary bone. So Goethe had this approach, holistic approach, the right hemisphere approach, which then later is termed as Goethean approach. A Goethean approach is a type of approach where you analyze your subject matter by going into a dialogue with it, by emphasizing with it, by understanding it inwardly as opposed to analyzing it as a geometrical object. You try to understand its dynamism as opposed to treating it as a dead static object. So it is everything but what you would see in Rembrandt's painting of anatomy, where you have a spatially extended body who is dead, who is no longer animated, and who is no longer organic in a symbolic sense, but is a pure extension. Whereas the Goethean approach, which inspired Spengler, is an approach of organic understanding. And what Goethe tries to find out is that he tries to find the principles, the prime principles that would explain every single stage of a particular organism. So for example, he would say that the principle that explains the organism of a horse is running. And then you go on to say that every part of a horse, but the fact that it stands upright, that it has really muscular quadriceps, and that its eyes are stereoscopic, and so on and so forth. Every single part of a horse basically points to the principle of running. And his idea was that every transformation of a plant is a transformation of the principle of a leaf. So this holistic approach then was taken by Spengler to understand culture and how cultures work. And he conceived civilizations as one pure organisms that have their own cycles, that as plants they flower and then they decay. But now the reason why I made this introduction is to say that most of the time when we speak about history, we presuppose a standard model, what Oswald Spengler wants to debunk, namely the Trinitarian model of antiquity, Middle Ages, modernity, whereby it is divided by 3 stages. And Oswald Spengler even jokes about that basically a 4,000 years of history is literally thrown into a category of antiquity. Now, according to Spengler, this model is flawed and it is incomplete. According to Spengler, Western civilization is not just a continuation of Middle Ages or of a Greek civilization, but rather it is a completely separate organism. Byzantine culture belonged to another organism, that is, it was an extension of a Magian culture, and Greek civilization was not a precursor to the Western one, but rather it was a completely different organism. And he called it a classical culture and thought that its prime symbol was the body, physical body. And according to Spengler, every single part of a culture should reflect the prime principle. So for example, in the case of in Greek tragedies understood as a mutilation of the body. Their Euclidean geometry is an extended body. Their veneration of musculature and physical bodies is also shown in sculpture, and how they venerate a naked body. So then, when it comes to the West, the mainstream idea goes that West was not really special before the Industrial Revolution. So basically, West became a thing when Industrial Revolution and Scientific Revolution came through. Now, of course, this is a totally flawed account, and interacting with the epics really puts you into a healthier perspective. Let me circle back. So there are 2 things about epics that I want you to think about. The first thing is that epics are mostly written in the springtime period of cultures. So springtime, according to Oswald Spengler, is an awakening period of a culture where it is in its embryonic phase, but it expresses itself through its impulses, through its instincts, and through its world feeling, as opposed to a world view. That's very important here, because world view takes place as a result of ossification, as a result of conceptualization, when your world feeling and fundamental instinct is transformed into a conceptual apparatus. Heidegger has a very interesting paper about that. It's called Age of the Worldview or Age of the World Picture, where he argues that actually when world becomes a view, it means that basically you have entered into a quantitative technological mode of being, which is generally a detachment to the original being. So anyway, one thing about epics again is that they come up in the springtime period. So for example, Iliad and Odyssey, they were compiled in the beginnings of the Greek civilization, where it was undergoing a transformation from early Mycenaean culture to a new rational Greek culture. And what you see in Iliad and Odyssey is an emergence of a new archetype with a new consciousness structure. For example, there is a reason why Odysseus is chosen as a sequel to Iliad. In Iliad, Odysseus is not a central character, and there are other characters in Iliad who could have become the subject for a sequel. But of course, Odysseus was the one who was chosen because Odysseus best reflects the soul of the Greek, namely the soul of temperance, the soul of wisdom, the spirit of abstract reasoning. Now, second aspect about epics is that they are mostly oral, and over time they are being written. So the first fact that they emerge during the springtime period, and the second fact that they are oral and usually were used as songs and they were recited orally, tells you that epics are basically an expression of a culture soul, culture spirit. Now, if you, for example, go and read Western epics, you will realize Western civilization, or it being special, or it being in any way distinct from others, didn't just become as a result of enlightenment. If you go and read the Song of Roland, Song to the Nibelungs, Tristan and Isolde, Arthurian legends, Eddas, the Knights of the Camelot, Beowulf, and so on and so forth, you will realize, if you're a Westerner in this case, that there is something that connects you to those characters. There is something about their individuality, about how they basically carry a whole world with them. Because you need to understand that the Western epics are special in their expression of very acute individualism that was carried on up until United States, which is basically an epilogue to Western civilization. But because cultures are inwardly binded, meaning that there is a DNA of culture, which are best expressed in epics, you can, as a modern American person, go and read early North European epics and find yourself there, because cultures exist and they are superorganisms. Lots of people want you to believe that there is no such thing as the culture, namely that cultures undergo such a big transformations that basically talking about their inward essence is just a nonsense. But it is not. If you read Beowulf or Song to the Nibelungs, you will realize that this is the culture who will come up with flying machines. This is the culture who's going to have serious individuals who are going to change the world. That this is the culture who is going to be the most progressive, that will subjugate the forces of the darkness. For example, if you ever listen to Jordan Peterson, he loved to mention how, modern leftists want to basically desacralize the idea of an individual and individual responsibility. He got a point. If you actually read all Western epics and try to derive a common denominator, the individual is the common denominator. And the word individual itself tells you that an understanding of what makes someone a human in the West is completely different from other cultures. Individual means a non-divisible. It is a fundamental building block of a society, a social atom. So for example, in my native language, which is a very archaic language, there is no word that is equivalent to the word of individual. In Georgian, for example, if you want to say individual, you would have to use a transliterated version of a Latin word, because it is a Western thing. So read epics if you want to understand how cultures work. If you want to know the soul of a culture, read their epics. And for the concluding remark, I want to make a short but insightful observation about the difference between the Asian culture and the Western culture. So the epic of the Western culture that defines its soul is Faust. And Faust, like Odin, for example, is someone who's ready to sacrifice something to gain knowledge. Faust was a scholar. He studied everything he could: jurisprudence, medicine, theology, philosophy. But there is a restlessness about a Faustian soul, about a Western individual, that never lets him to be content. There's a reason why Westerners always come up with something new, because their dopamine system is constructed in a way that they are always chasing a new high. And this is the tragedy of Faust. This is a person who will always chase for another high. And I won't spoil it for you, but in the end, he will find a resolution to somehow round off his incessant striving for new experiences. So in Faust then, you get a complete solidification of the myth of an individual. The myth of Faust is a reversal of the character of Job. And as you might know, Job is a biblical character, and Joseph Campbell, if I'm not mistaken, considered him to be the prime character of the Judeo-Christian culture, whereas for the Western culture he chose Prometheus. And the thing about Job, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing his name correctly. In Georgian it would be pronounced Iobi, but it's Job basically. So Book of Job tells about submission, namely that Job is subject to God's will. A God will determine the outcome. Job and his journey and the value of his journey will be determined how it will comport to the destiny put forward by God, by Almighty God. Now, Faust is a reversal of the story of Job, whereby in Faust, God puts a bet on Faust. God puts faith in Faust, and then we're going to follow what Faust is going to do. The destiny idea, unlike the Greek society and unlike the Judeo-Christian one, here in the Western pagan spirit, destiny comes out as a result of a character's personality. What will happen in Faust depends on Faust's actions, not on the destiny. God there becomes a spectator like you would be, right? So, for example, if you read Faust, you are a spectator and you don't know what happens. And this is the case with God, whereby he, like you, is going to be a spectator and is going to follow the actions of Faust. So that tells you about the hyper-individuality of a Western culture. Now, if you contrast it with Chinese culture, for example, one of the foundational epics is Journey to the West, about the King Wukong, who was born out of a rock, if I'm not mistaken. It was a long time ago I read that epic. And interestingly enough, the main character of this Chinese epic, The Journey to the West, this main character, Wukong, is a monkey. He's a Faustian character, so that already tells you a lot about the temperamental difference between the East and the West, where in the East, in their major epic, a Faustian character is a monkey. And why is Wukong a Faustian character? Well, because he, if I remember correctly, he basically mastered the 72 ways. He, tried to uncover the secret of becoming omnipotent. He went and erased himself from the list of people who would generally die. So he's a Faustian character. He wants to have all the power, all the knowledge. But in that epic, in The Journey to the West, you get an opposition between the heaven, the heavenly institute of the Eastern culture, which officiates bureaucracy and discipline. And you have a problem that is Wukong, who is untamed and who needs to be tamed. So in the end, there is a mission, namely that Bodhisattva Kuan Yin has to fetch Tripitaka, that is the Buddhist texts, and the Wukong is subjugated to that project. And the heaven basically gives the Kuan Yin, who's a female bodhisattva, a very specific tool that resembles a Western operant conditioning that came out as a result of behaviorism, namely that you can condition someone into doing something by punishing the behavior that is contrary to your goal and rewarding the behavior that leads to a desired result. And in that epic, basically there was this tool where Wukong had to put a specific hat, some iron hat it was, or some bucket, and Kuan Yin had a remote control, and every time Wukong would try to evade or escape the project, his mission, basically she would press the remote button or something, I don't remember the details, and it would shrink his head. So he was basically turned into a Pavlovian dog. And in the end, basically, it so happens that Wukong is tamed. They tame Wukong. the goal is accomplished. He becomes subservient to the metaphysical goal of fetching the Buddhist documents. So in the East, Faust is a problem that needs to be solved, whereas in the West, Faust is not a problem, but a solution. Faust finds a solution on his own without the help of others. He rejoices in his incessant striving and in his individuality. Faustian myth of selling your soul to the devil is still active. Every single self-improvement American guru, like More Plates, More Dates, and others who would try to optimize their health and performance by manipulating the physical reality, they are all Faustian characters. Every Westerner who takes a risk, who pursues a particular goal and is ready to commit to itself is a Faustian character. Your life is expressed in epics of your culture. So if you're experiencing a meaning crisis, find an epic of your culture and you will find the meaning of your life. You might not find a religion that guides you, but you will find your fundamental instinct. And knowing your fundamental instinct is absolutely necessary for you to have any religion. If you're a Westerner and a Christian, there's nothing wrong with reconnecting to the pagan soul of the epics of your ancestors, because in that case, your knowledge about yourself and what needs to be inhibited and what needs to be controlled will be enriched, and you will have a better understanding of who you are. That's it.